The one thing I wanted to point out was that one of the reasons that Strawberry is so high is that it's likely to be developed. The buyers have stated publicly that there's no proposal on the table. The sellers have said we've been unable to modify the entitlement restrictions that have stopped development in the past. And any discussions that they've had with the community are poles apart. So I'm not sure why Strawberry is so likely to be developed soon. I think even the school is now, as said today, they're looking at as soon as they could put students down there is 2018. We're years away from anything. I know this is 8 years, but today it's not clear what's going to be developed there. I know that we're not including the inclusionary housing numbers for low density housing. I would think that would be the buffer for what you're going to have. So I don't understand why the numbers aren't, let's target 85 units, let's take out 21 second units, let's have our buffer be the inclusionary houses that we're going to get, unless we don't actually believe that anyone will not buy their way out, which would be great if we could stop doing that. Then let's go find 60 units, not 150. My genuine question is, I think there's 200 units of agriculture housing, affordable housing for agriculture workers planned for. I think there's an entire, I don't know what you would call it, coalition doing that. I don't know why that's not included in houses that we think are going to happen, or do we not think all of that money is actually going to go develop those houses? If they are, we should probably put them in. In terms of the policies and programs being talked about, mostly you've heard it, but I just want to add my voice. I also oppose the multifamily development requirement. If you think it's controversial, hot button in the county now, you have no idea what it will be. I think a density equivalent study is called for, but we've talked over and over about this being on a tight timeline, so I don't know why we would try to pack that in. That's a good thing to do in the future, but I wouldn't try to do it for this housing element. Three last thoughts. It's taken as an article of faith, and it was said earlier here that affordable housing groups say it has to be dense. Density is good. I think you're hearing everybody who's not an affordable housing group say density is bad. So that feels like the crux of the matter, and that seems like the thing that should be described in one of these documents. Why is density good? Why do we have to do that? Two, for people working out of town, we had a event and Megan Hansen from the IJ came and covered it, and I asked if she lived in Marin, and she said, no, I can't afford to live here. And when I pushed her further on it, the answer was, well, I didn't get here what I would get over in the East Bay. So that's a choice. I brought people from Austin to work in the Bay Area for my job. Many of them have left. They don't like what you can get here for what they could get somewhere else. That's a choice. I'm from Detroit. You know what? It's a very different world. People survive there. You might say, why would anybody be in Michigan? There's people there who love it. This is market balance happening. And the third point is, I'm confused as to why all the high density advocates are supporting this housing element and almost none of the citizens. That seems like a very telling point. Thanks.
Thank you. Art, Craig, Knowlton, Pam Drew, and the final card I have at this point is Kevin Moore.
Hi, my name is Craig Knowlton. I actually represent the Indian Valley Associates. We've been around since the early 70s. And that's one of my points is the stakeholder meetings that occurred did not include long-standing neighborhood associations that should be included on the initial conversations about locations, especially when they are directly within that neighborhood association. And the county is very aware of these existing associations. I'm specifically concerned about 1970 Indian Valley Road. The IDA actually supports the proposal of 5 units. It's in keeping with our specific plan, and we would oppose anything that would increase the density there besides the 5 units. That being said, the second units, which is kind of the bottom line on the allocations, shouldn't those be allocated more distinctly so that we would possibly, or the way it's done now, we could possibly end up with 10 units there without even blinking because it's an arbitrary second unit number. Just a couple points to keep in mind. Nevada already carries the brunt of affordable housing in Marin County, and to add more, while obviously it's needed, it should be kept in consideration that we do carry a lot up there. One of the points about the workshops that occurred, the Indian Valley site was considered good for student housing, whereas it shows obviously that the attendees of the workshop had no idea about that site, don't even know where it actually is. We might be called Indian Valley, and we're the primary section, but the Marin County, or the College of Marin Indian Valley campus, we're only connected to it by a fire road. Otherwise, you have to go into Novato, down the freeway, and back through Ignacio to get to that college. We're not a direct connection. We're not good student housing. There's no access to that site. There's no transit. It would only increase the traffic count dramatically if it was more than 5 units. And we're already dealing with quite a bit of traffic from Novato pushing into Indian Valley just to get through Novato. So our traffic is increasing dramatically. And one of the criteria for that site is location to open space. While we do have a great open space, it is inundated right now with people from all over the Bay Area visiting that site and creating problems for the residents there. We're shouldering all of it. The county does not support us at all. The Parks Department does not support us at all. We're dealing with trash, graffiti, damage. It's pretty bad. So using that as one of the criteria to increase the traffic to that site is bad.
Wrap it up.
Yes, sir. And my last point is one of the items I saw was tenant protections, increasing tenant protections. And then one of the proposals that's kind of hidden within everything is implementing rent control. I think that's horrible for Marin County. In San Francisco, it's a mess and it's abused on every aspect of it. So to bring that to Marin County would be terrible. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Drew, followed by Kevin Moore. And if there's anyone else who would like to address the commission, if you will actually line up behind the speaker at this point and fill out your card. Go ahead.
My name is Pam Drew. I'm from Novato. I'm here tonight to ask that you remove the Tam Valley site and the Strawberry site from your list. They already have traffic congestion so that their highways are and roadways are at failure level. The congestion is already at failure level. And to put more density and more people in those areas is just cruel. It's really cruel, no matter what your dogma is. If you are a member of the American Planning Association, if you are a planner, you are trained in a certain area and you are looking towards a 20-year hence framework. You are looking to the future. You're trying to create the future. But creating that future leaves the people of the present behind. Well, at least do Tam Valley and Strawberry the favor of allowing them to be able to still use their streets, because they don't have good access to transportation, despite what I have heard about, oh yes, people can walk to the bus stop. People don't want to take the bus. The modern car, even though it contradicts everything the APA and all planners have been taught, the modern car is still the transportation mode of choice. And by forcing people to leave their cars, by forcing them to leave their homes and spending hours and hours additionally taking some sort of public transit, is going to breed nothing but bitterness and anger. Transportation is pushing much of this. And the APA is the group that originally set up the legislative framework. They set up the suggestions for this legislative framework that we are now experimenting with in California. Now, experiments don't necessarily breed happiness, and the extreme and radical ideas about counting units and banning single-family dwellings and other things that are located in this new housing element are sowing division and bitterness and anger. And it will come out eventually. It will come out at the ballot box. My last statement is raise the minimum wage. Don't spend millions of dollars trying to create houses in the most expensive county in the nation. Raise our minimum wage. If you want to serve low-income people, give them cash in their pockets for their rightly earned wage. They work really hard for that money.
You're at 3.5 minutes now.
Don't do this charade. Don't spend the money for the TV cameras and the politicians.
Thank you. Kevin Moore, followed by Marin.
Hi, my name is Kevin Moore. I grew up in Oakland and I moved to Marin about 28 years ago. I spent my first 13 years struggling to find rental housing, and then I finally bought a house. So I've lived both sides of this picture. Had the roommates I couldn't stand, just kind of survived through it. Marin, like this is a representative of Marin. We're spread out all over this room. The meeting's over on this side of the room. I mean, are the supervisors going to show up? Because people are spread out. People like some personal space. When you look at some of these places, like Marinwood Plot Village, I think a density of 20 units per acre, and that's 2.5 acres, so closer to 50 would be a better number for that place. You have to look at the common space. It doesn't take too many people to overcrowd and people start getting stressed out. And a friend of mine had a great saying. He said, everybody has their problems. More people, more problems. Then math is pretty simple, okay? So, and as far as tenants' rights, if you want to promote something, promote what are the eviction policies for troublemakers in these high-density units. We don't know, but maybe you should inform the public. That will get some, buy-in there, because, we seem to have a system where you get second, third, fourth, fifth chance. Now, troublemaker is bad for the people in the unit more than in the whole neighborhood. So that's something you really need to communicate. And if there aren't good laws for evicting troublemakers, we need to get them passed, okay? The other thing is I noticed in Marinwood Village, it lacks on-site facilities for recreation. It's over a half mile to the nearest park. Marinwood's got a great park, but if you're 8 to 10 years old, you're not gonna go a mile down the road. So you're gonna go play behind the building next to the freeway. So, you need to make sure that there's enough open common area. As far as the new housing density scheme, I look at, what are the two biggest concerns in Marin? It's traffic and water. So if you have a studio, you have someone using water, flushing toilets, and driving. You have a one-bedroom, you have someone using water, flushing toilets, and driving. It seems the same to me. Now, what if you say, well, there are more likely to be two people in one bedroom? Well, now you have two people using water, flushing toilets, and two cars clogging up traffic in Marin. Since there's no guarantee there won't be one person there, you really have to treat a unit as a unit. Now, if you're looking at school requirements, maybe this scheme does make sense because a studio is less likely to have children in it than a 3-bedroom apartment. So sometimes this might work, sometimes it doesn't work, but for right now, a unit should be a unit. The last thing is about schools. Land is expensive. We're running out of land, okay? And so when you start looking at all these housing units being added, we need to plan where are all these kids going to go to school. If we're over the limit, do we need to put in a portable or do we need to put in a 2 or 3 story building for that place? And the last thing is, I keep hearing about keeping open space open, but isn't the Easton site 110 acres for 43 houses? You know, versus they're going to use 5 up in Marinwood. You know, if I was a developer, and actually my wife's side of the family are all ex-Novato developers, they all moved out of the area because there's a lack of single-family development sites. But if I'm a developer and if I own the land, I'm probably going to want to build a house there. I don't care if you put in 10,000 houses in Marin. I don't know how this is going to save.
3.5 minutes now. So
Okay. I don't know how adding housing is going to save open space as long as more and more people come to the area. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final card I have is from Mary Maddox.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but I just feel like I'd like to share a little of my experience. I grew up in rural Kansas, so I like open space. My town was 3,500 people, 2-stoplight town. When I was 8, I came out to California for the first time to be a flower girl in my aunt's wedding. She met her husband at University of Davis, and I thought, what an amazingly wonderful place this is, and why wouldn't everyone want to live here? We had the ocean and the mountains and the forest, and I dreamed of it. And it took me until I was 34 to make my way here, and I specifically always wanted to live in Marin County because that's where the nature is. And I thought that's where people who wanted to make the world a better place were living too. And when we were coming here, my husband said, you know, Mary, what if it's not everything you ever dreamed it would be? And it's kind of a mean thing that he said because it's not. I worked as an advocate for kids in foster care in San Francisco for a couple of years, and the disproportionality that I see is really hard. My kid's public school in Marin gives him a laptop, and those kids don't have teachers. They don't have the resources that they need, and I don't have the answers to all of these issues, but I just want to say I've been a renter for, you know, over 20 years, and I'm just trying to be part of this beautiful community. And I've worked in these schools in Marin County for the past 8 years, and when we moved here, our rent was $1,500 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, and it went up to $2,000, and it's gone up to $3,000. We live in the Cope Apartments in Tiburon, where they're redeveloping, and they have all these beautiful units. And just last weekend, they told us we have specials for current residents. Come on down, we want to talk to you about how we want to give you 1 month free rent. But the rent's $5,000, and I work mostly as a substitute teacher, and one year my husband was doing the taxes and said, Mary, do you know you made $9,000 last year? So I just want to share that, you know, affordable housing is valuable and appreciated, and there is a lack of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission who hasn't already done so? Seeing none, I'll close.
Alternatively, if the commission would like staff to investigate certain issues related to policies and programs, possible revisions, and give us direction, whether it's general or specific, although the latter is generally preferred, then you may do that as well, and we can return at the next meeting with follow-up reports on the policies and programs. I do want to point out a couple of things that we've heard this evening in a general sense. There was a number of comments and a demonstration of the general support for affordable housing in Marin County. However, from our perspective, once the discussion about affordable housing becomes localized, then opposition can build, and typically does, and very often for legitimate reasons regarding development constraints in the county. You know, many of our sites have development constraints, whether physical or policy or usually both. So when we're presented with a request to develop a housing sites inventory that is based upon what we've heard, The reality of actually achieving that becomes very difficult, because what we've heard this evening and what we've heard in the housing workshops that we conducted leading up to this meeting, although not unanimous, was removal of housing sites from the Tam Junction area, the Tam Valley area, removal of the sites from the seminary property, or the site from the seminary property, removal of sites from the North Marin, San Rafael, area, and concerns about density on Woodland Avenue. And so that, I mentioned that just to point up the challenge that we all face in attempting to develop a draft housing element, and in particular the housing sites inventory component of that document, in a way that would garner broad-based support from most, if not all, of the communities that are affected by this document. And when I say we, I'm not just merely referring to local government officials, I mean our residents as well. Another more specific issue, there were a number of comments about water availability. I want to mention that or respond to that because that is a very important issue. It's one that the board is going to be receiving a report on tomorrow afternoon by the representatives of the two major water districts in the county. So if you're interested in that issue, that would be a good meeting to either attend or to watch on the webcast. But the point I do want to make is really more of a kind of a procedural explanation about how water gets addressed for development proposals in Marin. So when we receive a development project, whether it's on a property that is related to the housing element site or not, whether it's affordable or market rate, we coordinate our review of that proposal with the water districts in Marin County to make sure that they can demonstrate to the county, or at least can convey the message and affirmation to our staff that the water districts have a long-term sustainable water supply to serve those projects. If we don't receive that type of confirmation from the water districts, the project does not proceed. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Lily, who I think has several other points, one of which I believe is probably a very important clarification to make regarding one of the responses that she provided to Commissioner Erickson on the question about the removal of the one or two sites in the Tam Valley area.
So, thank you, Commissioners. I have a number of comments around the sites and then a few on the programs, just briefly. So, to Brian's comment about the moderate income sites that are designated in the Tam Junction area, the Planning Commission could remove those sites, but you would need to replace them with other moderate income. That's the clarification, is that we don't have enough of a cushion in the moderate income category to remove all those without replacing them with some other sites. So if your commission is interested in doing that, you could recommend some of the other sites to include as moderate income, and we could consider that feedback. Also,
Actually, before you move on, I have a question about that. And that is, if we provided more low income, would that count toward the moderate income?
no, there's a distinction between the low and the moderate.
Okay, and even if, so we have a huge cushion in terms of the lower income. Even if some of those were built beyond what we're required to, they wouldn't count toward the moderate income, even though they're more affordable.
That's correct.
Okay.
Low income housing, the lower income housing is restricted, they're income restricted units to folks who are earning at or below 80% of the median income, whereas moderate income is not income restricted in that same way. So there is a distinction, and they can't be kind of moved between those categories. We heard,
But who's making the determination that something is low income and can't be shifted into the moderate income category?
you can make a recommendation of designating sites. So you could make that recommendation if you wanted to move some sites from one category to another. But we can't just say, we're not gonna have any moderate income sites, we're just gonna have a big cushion in the lower income, and we're just gonna assume that, some of those are moderate. We need to show, and we need to have some explanation, some way of saying, why are these being considered moderate and why are these lower income?
Well, what was the explanation for why they ended up where they are to begin with?
The moderate income
In any
sites?
category?
Well, the above moderate, the market rate housing were sites that were likely to produce market rate housing. There was a small development site just based on what we know about development patterns in Marin. The moderate income housing was selected on small infill sites. So we think that a site that like 2400 Francis Drake in an incorporated Fairfax, that site that has commercial that's operating on it is not likely to produce large market rate homes. If there's housing developed on that site, it's more likely to produce smaller rental housing, market rate rental housing, or condos that would be affordable to folks in the moderate income category. And again, the lower income housing was developed through the evaluation criteria that staff talked about earlier in the presentation, that we can go back over if you'd like. We also heard a number of comments around Strawberry and why we are proposing in excess of the regional housing need allocation number. And again, that was staff's recommendation. If your planning commission would like to consider removing some of the sites, you could do that and reduce that cushion. Again, it's important to have some cushion and not just have the exact number, because in that case, we're really limited on what can be developed on a site. For example, if you only had the 87 or 90, if you were really close to the number, if a development application came through and the developer proposed something less, or through environmental review, it was determined that something less than that maximum that was on that site was proposed, then you would have to open up the sites list and reevaluate it. So you need to make sure that there is enough cushion, but if you would like to reduce it from what staff has proposed, that's something that the planning commission could consider.
Really, could we reduce the number of units at Woodland, Cal Park, from 40 to 20, and shift them into modern,
You could propose that, yes.
and then get rid of the 20 in Tam Valley?
You could consider moving things around, yes. So then around Marinwood, we heard considerable support for including and retaining the Marinwood development on that, or the Marinwood site on the inventory list. There was also some concerns around contamination on the site. It's our understanding that before a development application could be approved on that site, the site would have to be cleaned up to residential standards. So having a residential development on the site would require that it be cleaned up to a higher standard than if it just remains commercial. There was also a number of comments around second units. The 5 units a year that the county is projecting for the planning period is based on what we have approved in the last few years. So it's not a limited, we're not limiting it to that number in any way, but that's what we're projecting based on what we have developed over the past few years.
It's an estimate.
It's an estimate, right? It's projection based on, and an estimate based on what the county has approved in the last few years. Also, there was a lot of support around providing second units, and you'll note that on page 4 of 14, it's in the attachment 6, about the revised programs. We have a program, the old program 1G, that talks about second units, and we're proposing some revisions to that to kind of further incentivize second units. So it's something that we are considering. And second units is one of the ways that the county supports, one of the ways to provide affordable housing. Briefly, I wanted to mention some comments about the programs that came up. There was a number of public comments around the program that suggests requiring multifamily housing and multifamily zoning. And if you'll recall, that was a program that the Planning Commission considered in the 2009 draft housing element and recommended that we include that in the draft that was submitted to HCD. Later, after we went back and all the revisions that we did to the housing element, staff recommended removing a number of programs, including that one. because of time and resource constraints. So again, that's up, if your planning commission wanted to reconsider that program, again, that's at your option. The same thing with the density equivalents. Again, that was a program that we postponed or that we took off of the past housing element because of time constraints. There was also some confusion it was a study, that there was no obligation for us to do that, but we thought it was something that was of interest to look at how density is calculated and looking at the impacts of a studio as it compares to the county's average single-family home that's built, I think that is 3,800 square feet. So looking at those equivalents and studying that. I think that was it, unless you have, those are all my demo.
Okay, at this point, we have questions from commissioners to staff. We'll talk about the individual sites next, but at this point, our visits. So more general questions.
We'll make it clear when we come out with the discussion. Well, let me just, the fact that a property is being developed pursuant to the housing element, it still has all the same rights to second units, the ministerial approval of second units that applies anywhere else, in any other case. We're not restricting second units. In fact, the state requires us to encourage them, or at least approve them when they come along as requested.
That's correct, as long as the property can meet the ministerial development standards for second unit parking and unit size, those type of things, yes.
But the state has defined how we would count future units.
Correct. As Lily explained earlier, we can count for them prospectively after. Well, there's a limit on the number that we can take credit for, and I think we maximize the number of second units.
Right, the 25%.
Right.
We couldn't just say, well, we're going to do 100 second units, because that would not comply with the way the state allows us.
That's correct. There's a couple of thresholds on the second units. First of all, you need to be able to establish through what is your track record for developing second units. So since we approved, 5 last year, it would be hard for us to say, well, we're going to assume that we're going to approve 20 next year. You just need to show through your track record of what you've approved. The second piece of it is that you need to show how you're establishing affordability. And we did it through a second unit survey where we looked at what are second units renting for in the unincorporated part of the county. And the third piece of the second unit legislation is that for lower income units, you can only count 25% of your total RENA allocation using second units.
But there's no limit to the number of properties you can have second units.
That's correct. Those are
They meet the zoning requirements.
right. The two different things. Whether the county counts them toward their regional housing need allocation, or whether the county, is encouraging and approving second units that are part of the ways of meeting our need for affordable housing.
Commissioner Crescendius?
I just have a quick question. The current proposal for Marinwood Village, what is the density, units per acre?
Let me look that up, because they are not, the total parcel is 4.75, but they're not going to own the whole parcel. We're just looking at the southern end and the northern end, and the central part of it is retained by the current owners, with the part with the market on it, so I'd have to look that up.
Well, in your alternatives, I think it's the third alternative that assumes that attachment 4, the third alternative, if I have this right, assumes that we go to 20 units an acre, right? A default density of 20 units the acre, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Marinwood is proposed at 20 units the acre, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so I would be curious as to what the density is.
Okay, we'll look that up.
Commissioner Erickson?
Okay,
some questions. First, and I'm going to focus on the sites, like was asked. Seminary site.
We are gonna go through the sites individually, let's
Oh.
go down the list, so.
Okay, so not a
If-
question about the sites at this point?
Well, if it's a general question about how they're counted, or,
Yeah, like, for example, which there's one and you tell me if it's now or future. In terms of the seminary, they comment about geographic equity, especially with the table presented here. I'm trying to understand your table with the criteria. For example, geographic equity, if when you have a neighborhood where 60% is comprised of residents and comprised of renters, as it was presented, and I see here that when you say no other affordable housing sites located within a mile of this site, is it affordable, subsidized affordable, or affordable by design, for example, apartments? You know, because if that could be, if that's included, probably the Strawberry or the seminary would not receive the points because of so many apartments that are there in renters.
We looked at units that were deed restricted for folks who are lower income. That category was
Okay.
based on it. But you heard from our last speaker that rents in those apartments are not necessarily affordable. We heard that the rents are going up to five. It's in that area, so I think that we didn't do a rental survey of what the rents are, but I think that they're unlikely to be affordable to lower income households.
It's, when you say affordable, it's more like it's specific for very low income, subsidized affordable housing.
Affordable to lower income
In
households,
terms
right.
of the definition here, yeah. I think I can wait for the specific site when we go down the sites, and I'll make the question direction.
okay, why don't we do that first? And we'll use it, I think, table 2, I think what you have on the wall is the same as table 2, same order as table 2.
Yes.
Okay, first one is Easton Point. Comments on that?
Well, could we look, I'd like to make comments on all three of those
Well,
that are in the above moderate. I want to take out site specifics for above moderate and just have a number. This is our number of above moderate income units and not be site specific.
well, I assume the reason these 3 were identified is the 2 in Novato are land divisions that are approved.
Yeah, they have been approved in the past. I believe one of the entitlements is still valid. I'm not sure if the
I
other
think that
one
they
is.
both were extended to the legislation recently.
And Easton Point is because it is a pending application that actually has a court order saying the county must approve 43. So it's not speculative, it's actually either approved or as a court order. I mean, I would,
Chair Dickinson,
yes.
could we ask Commissioner Holland to explain why he'd like to do that?
Well, what if Paradise Drive, Eastern Point disappears?
We have no problem, right? Because we don't have a requirement to meet a number of units.
Right, unlike the lower income category, if one of the sites, let's say, if that site, for example, was,
Suddenly becomes open space.
right, was purchased for open space, the same requirement to open your sites list doesn't apply to the market rate housing.
As long as you can.
As long as you can demonstrate
You
that,
will make up the difference just
Through-
in the normal course.
right, through your zoning capacity.
That eliminates it.
Because I initially thought we should include a lot more projects, vacant land out there that we know is going to be developed with mostly market rate housing. But I was convinced that there's no reason to do that, because you don't have to worry about the 43 maybe dropping off the list, because you're not obligated to meet the number anyway, the number of 70 units. But
Okay, I favor leaving Eastern Point on.
I do too, because of circumstances. Then we can probably deal with the 2 Novato land divisions together.
And you can
And they're already approved, and they're only land divisions, so it's gonna be market rate housing, there's no restriction on it, and it's 1 home per lot, so it just reflects what is likely gonna happen. We didn't get the 150 Shoreline Highway, and this shows 3 moderate, but I believe and it's already an approved project, I believe the approval required 1 lower income unit, and then 2 market rate units, which are very small, so they probably would be moderate then.
That's correct.
But and then it's 3 moderate income. And so-
No, it's been changed from,
So we can put 1 on the lower income?
well, it seems it should reflect what the approval is.
Yeah, I didn't understand why this was,
There is one.
As I recall, our approval to meet the inclusionary requirement, 1 was lower and the other 2 were market, which they're very small, so they would be moderate then.
That's correct. I'm not, and I believe that the legislation that extended entitlements applied to this site too, but I'm not sure, because I thought that entitlements had expired, so I need to, and I'll have to look at that. So I wasn't sure about it, so we thought, let's leave it in the moderate, but if you prefer to move one of them into the lower income category.
Because we need more moderate, like in terms of to count the numbers. It's like realistic.
it's realistic.
Yeah.
Their permits haven't expired yet,
It should reflect the entitlements,
Okay.
unless they're expired.
Okay,
And it was a master plan.
I believe it was, yeah. Well, let's confirm the status of that, and then we'll.
and if it is 1 lower and 2 moderate, then we'll make sure that it reflects that. And if they've expired, then leave them in the moderate.
And for the 150
right?
Shoreline,
Okay. If it expired, then the whole thing is up for redesign anyway. I'm surprised they haven't proceeded with that project. They seem so anxious to have it.
You can say that about several of these projects.
and the density on that project is 5 units per acre. So it's by no means, I mean, it's not affected by the assembly bill or anything else, it's actually relatively low density.
That's correct.
But if they didn't have the deli, then they could have more units.
Horrible location.
Anyway, okay. Armstrong.
As we get into Armstrong later, can you help address a question based on the presentation from one of the speakers indicating that though the housing element may be submitted per your recommendation of 10 units on that property, having included it as a part of the housing element, does it bring a default 30 units to the acre opportunity for the development?
It does not infer any specific density, but there is, a number of our sites are zoned with more units than what we proposed in the inventory. Part of housing element legislation is just looking at the zoning, but part of it is looking at what is a realistic development potential on that site. The density for the site at 217 Shoreline Highway is 20 units an acre. It's neighborhood commercial, and that density has been in place for quite some time. But the assumption on the inventory is considerably less than that.
That's like a quarter,
Right.
it looks like it looked at the 5.6 units per acre. So it's a quarter of what the zoning would actually allow.
There. No. That's right.
Okay, so where are we on?
I want to
Seventeen.
remove Armstrong altogether and make up for it by shifting from Cal Park.
I agree.
I would say that part of the equation here,
And I can say the same thing for Armstrong.
we just said Armstrong twice.
For right.
You mean Chevron?
Chevron, yes.
I look at Armstrong at 5.65 dwelling units per acre as a site that could have a pretty nice aspect. I wouldn't mind having an apartment overlooking the creek where I could walk over to Dipsy and enjoy having a breakfast there and walk down to the pharmacy and get supplies. It has challenges that I think can be mitigated and overcome relative to the issues of flooding, issues of sea level rise. it's not my favorite site. It is very constricted, it has terrible access, there are issues. But 5.65 units to the acre, 10 units, I think could be made quite livable and very attractive in that location. So I think it's worth arguing to keep it.
Commissioner Holland?
Okay, I agree with you completely on the site itself. It's where the site is located in the county, and I don't think that one is right at ground zero.
Well, it's just
For the new signal, for the
Yep.
awful intersection,
Yep.
where Highway 1 turns, for the traffic backing up onto 101 and down 101 ways, I don't think that this neighborhood can stand another car. And it can be the nicest units you want to build, people that are gonna have cars, and we just got to face up to the fact that Southern Marin is carved out.
But if it doesn't develop residentially, it would develop commercially.
Not if there was a moratorium.
Well, that was what I was gonna speak to. I mean, a building moratorium or development moratorium is not something the planning commission does. That's something the board of
No.
supervisors does.
That's right.
And all of the arguments that I heard here tonight about traffic and water really talk to an all-out building moratorium. It shouldn't be just put on the backs of the housing element sites. And if that's what we really want, then that's what the neighborhood should go to the board of supervisors and say, we don't want to see one more stick in our neighborhood. Speaking of, a 2x4 as a stick. So if you don't want to see any more 2x4s, then we should go to or someone, whoever wants to, should go to the board of supervisors and ask for a development moratorium. So that's what I think that should happen. But if we don't have a development moratorium, then I don't see just using this housing element as, 10 units on the Armstrong site and 10 units on the Chevron site are just really not going to have much of an impact on those issues of traffic and water and whatever other issues we want to bring up regarding congested development in that area.
Well, and as the courts have confirmed, a moratorium can only last for 2 years while you're doing something.
Yeah, it's a breather, and I think especially at seminary, that breather would be a very wise thing to do. A moratorium that extended, it's the county in unincorporated areas from Tam across to Strawberry, and stop all the development until we can figure out what to do with both of these areas in terms of mitigating this cascade of problems. I was talking to a person in the audience, and who was a word I take very seriously, who just gridlocked over the weekend trying to get off the freeway anywhere in Southern Marin, and finally had to drive down to Spencer and just come back and go back home, because it was not possible to get off to go to Mill Valley, Tiburon, or Tam Valley. And it's reached a point where it's just not viable any longer. And I think we've got this, this is the place to start, is to these 3 sites, take them off the housing inventory, and make up for these sites in perhaps Grady.
Commissioner Erickson?
In the last 2 years, I had the opportunity to participate in projects related to sea level rise. And I think that's, despite the fact that if we take the sites out of the housing element, doesn't mean that the owner cannot develop. Only to be clear here, the site and the owner of the site can do whatever he wants to propose the community to. But I think that's not a responsible position of the planning commission to include a site that's clearly, like it was pointed by speakers, and it's in sites, in mapping of sea level rise all over, and we know that floods already. I think that's not responsible for us to include this here. And I may agree about the traffic and et cetera, but that's not my priority issue regarding the sites. I think that's really the flooding and sea level rise. 10 people stranded in an apartment or apartments is not okay. So I think that we have to take that in consideration, and usually, like in the last years, planning has to be considering that, and I think it's time for us to consider that in our planning of our cities and our county. So I think that for that reason alone, I think this shouldn't be here, but
We're making a recommendation to the board, we're not making a decision, and the board doesn't have to accept it, but I think it carries a lot more weight if it comes to and say, these are not viable sites, not because of the sites themselves, but because of other issues that have grown up in overdevelopment of the entire southern Marin area. And this added, if we're going to comply with the RENA numbers, we're going to have to find those housing sites elsewhere in the county. And this business that it all has to be spread out equally doesn't make sense to me. The available land is in the north, and the reason it's not in the south is the south developed earlier in the history of the county, and was already pretty solidly single family when they were still having dairy ranches up in Marinwood, and that's where the available land
You
is.
could develop
for
Inverness.
units.
Other places can develop.
Brian or Lily, do you have anything?
Well, I think I advise the commission to come back around to the position I believe that Commissioner Holland made regarding removing the sites in the moderate income category for the Armstrong Nursery and the old Chevron sites, which results in 20 units total, and compensating for those by shifting them from the Woodland at Auburn site, taking 20 of the 40 and moving those into the moderate category, if I'm understanding the proposition that Commissioner Holland made. So that's what's on the table.
It reduces the cushion.
Commissioner Crusaders?
Commissioner Erickson is right that whether a site is on the list or not doesn't govern whether a proposal comes in. It could come in, development proposal could come in much higher than 10 units an acre, 10 units proposed. So I think that's an important thing. I think another factoid is that there are lots of ways to compensate for flooding in new construction. You know, Novato has an apartment building that is, the parking is on the ground floor because it is, at grade, because it is in a flood zone. And that's what happens when it floods. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that I would speak against splitting up Woodland or California Park with 40 moderate and 40 very low, because I think it really does compromise the feasibility of the lower income units.
No. We just reduced Woodland from 40. No, okay, yes.
Yeah, but what we're saying is that what Lily explained was that if you put them in the moderate income category, if you develop more at lower income, you still have a deficit in the moderate income. So I would figure out another way to take care of the deficit in the moderate income than splitting up California Park. Because I think California Park, though I have not been an advocate for California Park, because staff will remember, and many of you will remember my comments about it in the last round. But here it is again, and I think it is much more feasible at 40 units, 40 lower income units, because of the financing that is available for lower income units. So I would, if we want to take out the Armstrong and the Chevron, then we should come up with another solution for moderate.
I just would add on to Commissioner Casales' comment about the Woodland Auburn site, is that given how small it is, that it may be difficult to accommodate both moderate and the same number of moderate and lower income as if they were all lower. The moderate income units would tend to be larger units, and they would require maybe additional parking likely than the lower income units would.
I'm not averse to changing the Woodland from 40 to 20 and just moving those 20 into the moderate with no lows. With no lows.
Well, I think one of the reasons that site is on the list is because of default density in our HOD designation in the countywide plan. And the state allows us to count all of the potential units as potentially affordable. And it's kind of working with the states, the way the state deals with the numbers. Commissioner Erickson?
I have a question about the California Park site, actually. One of the speakers, residents of the area, said that if the area is considered a wetland and a
Across the
flood
street.
zone,
Maybe
across
a
the
flood
street.
zone, but the wetlands is across the street, across Woodland.
but it's a flood zone. It's a,
It may be, it's
Maybe.
it's adjacent to the railroad tracks.
and the wetland is across the
You're
street.
confusing Indian Valley.
No, it's
They did say that, and the woman did say that it was
Yeah.
across
It's
the
across the
road
street.
from the
Yes.
wetland. but-
So it's okay, like, I don't see it any environmental constraint considerations here in the previous housing element regarding neither flooding or wetland, so I'm
The,
only confirming, that's not.
the wetlands is across the street
Street,
from it, it's
uh-huh.
in that area.
It's in that loop in the road that goes around. The road makes a loop.
It's inside the horseshoe of Auburn.
Yeah.
Auburn,
Okay.
it's a horseshoe around.
There's a wetland in there.
Right,
Makes
looking
sense.
at, looking at the map here of the parcel, the wetland is across the street in this area. If you look at it over here.
And I believe from my driving by that side, I believe it's all filled pretty air, actually.
I think so.
I don't think there's any vegetation on it.
Right, it's a dirt, it's like parking lot, just dirt.
Okay, shall we go back to the Armstrong first of all? And shall we do a straw vote?
Well,
I'm not
should
sure
we
we
pair
can
it?
really piecemeal.
You want to do it one at a time?
Should
Or
we
just do
piecemeal?
both?
And I think are we comfortable doing both of those, dealing with both of them at the same time, Armstrong and Chevron?
What can we get out of Big Rock Deli?
I'm sorry?
Big Rock Deli.
Trouble.
Can we put it on the list?
This is the whole,
The buses go up there.
Only three buses.
Okay?
just a
Only
minute.
three buses.
Don't they have those little, room kind of units that go in there? I've seen one of the new small Grand Transit shuttles
So,
Doesn't
coming
go
out
there
there.
anymore.
Big Rock was not included in, it was evaluated in the SEIR, but it was not included in the draft housing element. And we're focusing, our recommendation is to focus on the sites that were included in the current housing element. Because they went through an extensive public review process, they were approved by HCD, so we're trying to focus on those specific sites.
I'm looking at them on a chart that says 2014, 2022, potential housing sites for future housing elements.
They already passed through
As of
environmental.
February 2015.
That's correct. It was included in the SEIR we looked at, but given the fact that our regional housing need allocation came down so much, our recommendation that was approved in the work plan that we took to the board in March was to focus on these sites that were included in the 2007 to 2014 housing element.
And there's only 15 of them.
That's right.
Well, then we don't have any options. I mean, out
Yeah.
of those 15, one is Granny Building, one is Grady, one is St. Vincent Silvera. There's just not much there.
This is true in general, that we do have limited sites, but I think that we haven't included all of the sites, so you could look at some of the other ones that we didn't recommend.
Well,
Commissioner Pasillas?
I'd like to ask staff, would there be any reason why we could not include some of the St. Vincent Silvera as moderate income units? I mean, keeping in mind, obviously, what was approved in the general plan in 2007.
Actually, we could
Yeah, we had a prior
include
plan.
them as lower income.
Well, we had
Oh,
100
yeah.
lower, but we could split that 50-50 if we so chose.
Marin City,
Right, that's another one that was missing on the list.
My students.
15 units lower income.
That's correct.
That's the one where we have some flexibility.
There, the
That's on the list?
sites that are not included in our recommendation that were in the previous, element included St. Vincent's, Grady Ranch, the Marin City, Community Development Corporation office site.
Actively pursuing housing, I mean, they own that site now.
They own that site, right. It's my understanding that under the new director, they have not pursued, they're not actively pursuing it at this point. I haven't heard anything from them that they are.
But
They were, but they have not.
Yeah, but they would like to. And so I think it's important also to be on the housing element to help make it more feasible.
It got a much higher score on your site list evaluation than, for example, Armstrong did.
That's right. Armstrong wasn't included for lower income, but you're right, it did score higher. Are you talking about it for lower income or for moderate? Moderate income, we didn't use the site evaluation, that wasn't part of the recommendation. If you're considering it for lower income, then there's some other concerns with having it in the lower income category.
But how does it help us with the two moderates in Tan Valley, Armstrong and Chevron?
If you include it in the lower income category?
Yeah.
I wasn't suggesting that you do include it in the lower. I was going to tell you some concerns that we might have if we're going to make that recommendation. I wasn't clear whether you were suggesting moderate or lower income.
I don't care, as long as we can get the numbers to come out of the gate.
Well, it is actually one that I had felt should be on the list in some category.
Can we put it on the list in the moderate category? It's only 15 units.
It's not moderate.
Yeah, I think that if you wanted to move the units from the Tam Junction area and move them to Marin City, you could do that.
As moderates in Marin City.
I think you could suggest that. I don't know if that's consistent with what the property owner had previously expressed, an interest in developing housing that is serving.
But they never applied for anything.
They have not applied for anything, but based on what they've expressed in the past.
But it wouldn't prevent them from doing lower income housing.
That's true.
Would not,
No.
Would be detrimental anyway in the application for any funding?
I'm sorry?
Would it be detrimental in any way when they apply for funding to develop the units? Because it's got the category is moderate income instead of low income?
Not that I'm aware of. It would depend on probably funding sources, but not that I'm aware.
Well, if we took 20 out of Tam Valley and shifted 15 into the moderate from Marin City, then we only have a cushion of 1 unit in the moderate.
Sure.
We still have the other ones at top.
Yeah.
Commissioner Christina, yes?
I think that, if we add some of the St. Vincent's units in the moderate income category.
If we shift all of St. Vincent's in, that's...
Well, I'm not saying we do all of them, I'm just saying they're likely to develop in that category anyway, particularly if they're senior housing. I mean, there's very few seniors that can afford rents, even at the, certainly market rents they can't afford, so.
I would
Commissioner Allen?
At this point, rather than horse trading back and forth on numbers, can we go site by site and have some value and conversation about each site? And then we can find balance? Because I think that, Marin City site should be on the list. I'm very much in favor of taking Armstrong and Chevron off, but let's go through it.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of what-ifs being bandied about. I don't think it's getting us to the goal.
Well, we got down through Armstrong, we seem to have a consensus down to that point, and so let's go, we go to open it again?
Right.
Well, do we have a consensus on Armstrong?
Yeah, I would say.
I know there's 3 of us already in favor of taking it off.
Should there be a vote, actually?
A straw vote.
They're not formal votes, this is a workshop.
Well, I'm trying to get on that.
I
In
was
terms of three
presenting-
people.
Yeah,
Three
yeah,
people.
yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that this is a hearing. It's actually not a workshop. It's a public hearing.
But you told us only straw votes.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate because we are planning on giving you the remaining portions of the housing element, although I don't think they're gonna have significant bearing on this, but I would suggest you take straw votes
Okay.
tonight, with the intention that those would be given serious consideration as part of your final vote, after you've received the environmental documentation for the housing, the draft housing element at the last
Why don't
hearing.
we go back up the top and start straw voting each one of them?
On
Alternatively,
the
you
first
could
three, I think
discuss it and then,
So if there's any,
What?
I don't think there's been discussion on the first three, and even on
You
the
said you
fourth.
want a straw vote.
I think you could straw vote I mean, if you can get there, you can just straw vote the whole list unless you need to do it site by site. I mean, you
We
could
have
just
to
do
do it
that.
side by side.
Yeah.
But my understanding was on the first four, we all agreed, right?
Okay, straw vote first.
Okay, then we get down to.
Well, actually, no, because Manzanita, we shifted from 3,
Right, but we all agreed on it.
okay.
Yeah.
Then we get down to Armstrong. And do we want to
Remove
pick it off?
it, remove it.
Michelle, who's noticed?
Well, okay, but this, it really does relate, I mean, I think looking at the whole, it really does relate to what else goes on the list. You can't just delete and do nothing.
Well, I was really assuming we're going to put something back in later on.
Okay, keeping in mind, of course, that tomorrow a developer can come in on the Armstrong site and propose 20 units to the acre.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, just so we all understand that.
regardless of what we did.
Or propose a commercial building.
Or, well, can propose anything depending on how much brain damage they want to go through with zone changes.
You'll have to deal with
No,
that.
the zoning allows.
Commercial,
Yeah, allows
okay,
commercial or residential.
okay.
Okay.
Is there a vote?
Okay, well, we'll straw vote that one. All in favor of removing that one from the list? Armstrong.
I'm in favor.
Those units.
Fine.
Okay, now we get down to, in order, we get to Oak Manor.
I'm in favor of leaving it as it is.
Agreed.
You know, I think the moderate, the assumption about moderate is probably realistic in terms of what would be built there, if anything is. Then we get down to the Chevron station.
Remove it.
Agreed.
Katie, did you?
It's okay.
Okay, and I'll go along with that too. I used to live directly across the street from it, so I know the area very well. My first house was directly across the street from what was the Chevron station, which it had gone from. Okay, Seminary Drive.
I want to remove it.
Stick it to back.
I think we've got an affordable housing district
Pardon me?
that, excuse me, I'm trying to speak to seminary. We have an affordable housing district that allows for as many as 60 units there. I think it's absolutely reasonable to keep 20 lower income units and 20 moderate income units. Out of the 126 acres that site offers, to miss the opportunity to have some affordable housing as a mix, knowing that the trust intends to try to do new housing to replace the student housing there. Whether their eventual approval is for 40 units or 300 units, we don't know. And we're not here to talk about the seminary project. But I think there's an opportunity to use the 2 acres, which are floating 2 acres. So I am not persuaded by the heron rookery. I walk that site 3 times a week. I've never seen evidence of a rookery on that property. So I'd like to see documentation if there
I
exists
got photos right here.
as to where it is, and provide that another time. The point is, it is, impossible to think that we can't find 2 acres out of the 126 that would afford the opportunity to develop away from the rookery, wherever its location exists, and that we can find 20 lower income units and 20 moderate income units. And that will not overburden Strawberry in the prospect of future for traffic or for school impacts or water impacts or any of that, as far as I'm concerned. There's ample opportunity to bring some very livable, excellent, affordable, and low-income units to that site. It's a place that I would like to live if I was in that situation, as opposed to Armstrong or as opposed to the Chevron, that are horribly constricted by traffic and other issues. I drive that every day. I've commuted to the city from there. I drive that all the time. And it is not overwhelmingly difficult. 40 units is not going to change that.
40 units? So you want to leave it the way it is?
No, he wants it 20
I
and
was
20.
suggesting that we capture 20 of the moderate income.
Oh,
20 and 20.
20 and 20, and put the Marin City in the lower income where it's sort of projected to go anyway.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll go along with that.
I will not go along with that. I think that, once again, it's the same argument as with California Park. If you put them in the moderate income category, you make the lower income units more difficult to produce. And, I mean, I'm looking at this as, hopefully, we actually will get some lower income units, not just put numbers on a paper that will assure that we never do get them.
Yeah, and I think that's right, Commissioner Crisarius, but I do think that given the fresh slate that the trust is going to need to bring to the consideration of that development, that a mix of income product should be a part of what is eventually offered on that property.
Well, yeah, there's a lot more development potential there than 40 units.
And we don't know what that really is going to be, but 304 student housing units are entitled.
Well, let me ask, if the student housing is torn down, do we have to make that up somewhere? Or if they tear the student housing down and it's built new units, would they all count?
No.
Is it the net increase or
The student housing, it doesn't count toward as housing.
group housing.
Right, and a lot of them are dormitory style, I think, and those wouldn't count towards your housing need. But I think, let me think about this. So your question is, if they tore down all of the student housing, would we be able to count 100% replacement, or would we have to, and they added new? No, I'll have to look at that a little bit more.
That's a critical question.
Yeah, I have to look
The
at that.
plan that addresses that, the seminary master plan, it has to be student housing.
As far as your housing need, I need to research that a little bit more.
Well, the thing, I mean,
Look at the big.
I voted against the 30 unit per acre floating 2 acre thing. I thought that was a bad idea. What's happened since that vote is that the seminary sold the land, you no longer even own it.
Right.
So something is gonna happen with the property.
Exactly.
Whereas before, we didn't know that. I mean, they had a pending application
Absolutely.
for the seminary. We now know that there will be something other than the seminary there. And I don't think it should be 40, but I would go along with 20 and 20.
Commissioner Dickinson?
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify my response. If you're just counting it, if you're thinking that the student housing, that you have to replace it with a lower income, those units are not counting towards the county's lower income housing stock. If you're talking about as market rate housing and whether we would be counting them one for market rate, I'm not sure about that.
Some of the housing is independent units.
Right, some of the student housing it's family student housing, so they are independent units, right.
And just to clarify, they're not counting towards the county's lower income housing stock in terms of being deed restricted in the way that we define affordability. They may be in fact affordable through the arrangements that the seminary offers their students and faculty.
And because they're not deed restricted, then I assume there would be at least less responsibility to replace them with lower income units. If they were deed restriction, you may get into that issue of,
Yes.
are you losing existing?
Yes,
That would
that's
be
correct.
much more of an issue
That's
if they were
correct.
deed restricted, yes.
Commissioner Erickson?
Only to comment on what the concerns from Commissioner Presidius regarding splitting the number of units. Lily was just saying about Marin City that if we put moderate, would not be detrimental for the application for affordable housing. I think the same would apply for seminary. It would not be detrimental for us to split, and then after, if they want to apply for low-income development, would not be detrimental, the fact that it's in the housing element, split it here.
So that's maybe a good point. I want to just ask a question. If it's designated as moderate income and it does not develop as moderate income, do we still have the same site substitution issue, or is that only for lower income?
It's just for our lower income requirements.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
You wouldn't have to substitute?
I don't think we have to substitute specific sites.
Moderate,
I'll confirm that, but it's my understanding that it's just the lower income units.
Okay,
okay.
so where are we?
Uh,
Commissioner Alvarez?
There is a question that I think that you raised, Commissioner Erickson, about the financial feasibility
Yeah.
piece of it, so. We've heard consistently that developments for lower income at less than 25 total units that's more of a critical issue, is the total units on a site rather than the density of the site. The density is less important than the total number of units that you could develop on a site. We do have examples of smaller developments where we had a 13-unit development, but there was 19 funding sources, and that developer said that they would never do a development that size again. So I think that really from an affordable housing development perspective, if we're looking at feasibility, that we've heard that 25 is the minimum number that makes it feasible on a site.
But the fact that it's listed in the housing element, it does, the developer can do lower income. It's not going to affect the fact that it's in the housing element.
That's true, but it also is, I think that placing it on the housing element with a certain number sets some expectations.
That's
And
right.
plus, I think that 25 units is an agreeable minimum for an isolated project. But we're looking at the seminary as a proposal of a large context development that is going to seek approvals for many more than that. So the feasibility of a project that is contained within a master development becomes much more feasible, in my mind.
Assuming that it develops in that pattern, that's.
Okay, so we have a proposal. All straw vote all in favor of the proposal.
And what's the proposal then?
Designated as 20 and 20.
Okay.
20 lower and 20 moderate.
Okay, before I will just state before we vote, the difference to me, I still lean towards wanting to just take it out, but I'm going to support the proposal. The difference between here, I'm speaking to traffic, and TAM already is gridlocked. The traffic situation is already to the point of impossible, whereas I'm not saying your traffic situation is good on the east side, but it's not as bad as TAM, and the speculation is that, adding more housing is going to lead to that, and that may be true, but it's not there yet.
Well, this may not even be more housing.
Correct.
You're not required to
That's
replace
true.
the existing house.
And the discussion says, in addition, the analysis would address fee issues such as road impact that would be required in the, doesn't that seem like a sentence that doesn't belong there? We don't need to linger over it, but.
Sorry, we're reading it.
Well, we're changing it so there would be an analysis.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't really relate to.
No, it doesn't relate
That's
to
the
requirement.
first evaluation of land use designations.
I just think
There's other conclusions
It
if
just-
it's already in place.
it's hanging around there from some other document.
Okay, the discussion's not gonna go into housing element.
That's true.
anyway.
Right.
We can cross that sentence out.
Study residential density equivalence.
The,
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on the outcome of the required multifamily. Were you saying,
I was gonna say that on the basis of the evaluation that's gonna be conducted for the preceding program, you would then have an analysis, a study on whether or not to require multifamily.
and was that there was, no, yes.
No,
well,
I basically think we should just nix it, because I think that we're gonna, it's going to create a lot of conflict, and we're not gonna get that much out of it, because most of these sites are already occupied. I mean, like 99% of them have buildings on them. So I just think that we could find more productive ways to use our staff time.
Okay, I agree with
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, the interest in this policy may be addressed through the prior policy in item number C, which is, that says, among other things, identify sites for multifamily housing.
Absolutely. That's the key. That's what we do want to do is the evaluation of it. whether-
okay, does everyone agree with that?
Yes.
Straw vote, yes?
Yes.
So that was unanimous.
And do we want to pursue a study of residential density equivalence?
May I comment on that? Chair, may I comment on that?
Yes.
Based on comments from the public, including Ms. McQuaid, Valerie McQuaid, about the tiny homes, the need for especially seniors to be able to afford to be homeowners and et cetera, I think that would help with that, to address that need. So I would support the continuation of that in the housing element.
It says just evaluate options. Actually, I had a problem once I got down to discussion and examples, but evaluating, let me say that for decades now, I've advocated that we count something other than kitchens. And we actually voted in the Mill Valley General Plan back in 1989. Is it's kind of ridiculous to measure density and impacts based on how many kitchens per acre you have, when there's a huge difference between a studio, a senior project that has a kitchen, and a 5-bedroom, 6,000 square foot house. And I think there has to be a better way. I get hung up when we look at the model that was in here.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and would suggest that, in my experience of working on housing, that the most successful definition is total building area, FAR. So that you don't talk about 100 units that might be 600 square foot versus 2,000 square feet. You're talking about a total building area available on that property. And it's defined as, in my experience, as FAR. So, you go to a site, you know that you have a 0.5 or a 0.3 total building area, and you can slice and dice that into 10 units or 40 units, depending on the size of the units. But you're setting a limitation on the development on that property in ways that is nothing you're going to equivocate. It's real clear. So it's up to a development proposal to define whether or not it's small units or large units, but it's capped. And that begins to address things like the wind cut, where the mass of that project is significantly larger because they're large market rate units.
At the same time, I think there are issues beyond just the mass
Oh, absolutely.
that
Can I
come
say-
into play in terms of the impacts of the development. But that's what you look at as a study.
Right.
It's harder to study, and actually I think for the few people from Strawberry who are still here, I think it would be to their advantage to have that kind of study, because the seminary historically has argued that they're entitled to one-for-one transfer between student housing, which has minimal impacts, and market rate housing. And this would get to that.
So are we in favor of just leaving it in there? As a study?
Yeah, I do want to clarify that this particular program commits the county only to evaluating options in this regard. It does not commit the county to taking any particular course of action. I point that out because I believe you received one piece of correspondence in advance of the meeting that put this in a kind of unfortunately, a very misleading and unfavorable light as being a surreptitious attempt by the county staff to kind of sneak something by the community, which of course it's not, because the evaluation itself that this program were ultimately to be approved by the board in the final draft would take place in the full light of day with planning commission hearings and board hearings if any specific proposals came out of it.
And it probably would require a countywide plan amendment and the zoning ordinance amendment.
There would be some major
to the board.
decisions.
Okay, so we're ready to move on. Expand the scope of project review.
I'm going to speak against including this program in the housing element.
I concur.
Agreed.
Yes.
And I agree also. Commissioner Erickson, do you?
I would, they talking about the expanded scope of
Yeah.
project review? I am in favor of it. It's like, there are some projects, oh, sorry. There are some projects where you can make a better case with the community if you can show the benefits of it. And that goes with the next one that is about community education, really, about the benefits of affordable housing, because despite the fact that, yeah, everybody in theory is in favor, what we see, the reality is different. And I think that if we could prove through analysis how, and then showing numbers to the whole
As a part of a review process. So if you're going to do a multifamily housing project, affordable or low income, that there is a community outreach, staff attended meeting as a part of the process.
I just wanted to clarify that under housing element legislation, we can't require something specifically of an affordable housing development that we wouldn't require of a market rate. So if you're going to propose that, then you, if you said for lower income, then you would need to propose it for any housing development.
Thanks for being there.
I have a question. Doesn't staff require a community meeting now? Isn't that already required?
It's in the countywide plan, but it's strongly encouraged. There's a number of there's language, it may not be required, but it is strongly encouraged.
Okay, so I think they generally happen already. I mean, I can't think of a proposed development where a community meeting has not happened. And also, all of this work already happens. You know, now if we just gonna make ourselves feel better by putting it as a program in the housing element, that's okay with me. But we should recognize that it does already happen. Staff does all of these things.
But, Ms. Commissioner Christie, you may agree with me that with the misinformation that we have out there, that ends up fueling the opposition in a lot of times not like facts and only misinformation out there. What I saw in these last almost 2 years here and before is the need for a more proactive position and work of the community development agency and the county to be ahead of the game and to really make an ongoing effort of education and outreach. I don't think that nowadays is enough. Don't get me wrong, they do and they do a good job, but I think that putting the plan would make the case for the community development agency to invest more resources in this aspect of the work, their work, that will facilitate the approval of projects in the future, I think.
There's no funding proposed for this, right? Yeah.
I don't think the problem is lack of public education. I think there's been a lot of it. So, but-
Okay, so
but we should
where
move
are
on.
we in the proposed program? I mean, I have no problem leaving it in. And you can add another one. These are only, the bullet items are only to consider. So you could put another one in, require, public meeting on it, you need a proposal. Senator Felt has that as a matter of policy.
Yeah,
It requires
can we mandate it? I, of course, acknowledge that there are, most smart developers do it already, but rather than encourage it, I would mandate it. The other thing is, I think that there are a significant number of interest groups who support and promote affordable housing, and that this kind of education is ongoing by them, as opposed to the county taking a position of being the one to reach out and educate the community.
So what is the consensus to take it out?
Only to address the last comment is there is not enough or sustainable movement for the inclusion of more affordable housing in our plans. Only saying. My perspective is there is not enough, and I think that instead of relying on outside, it's the duty of the government to educate the public about it and to be more transparent in all these planning processes. So I strongly support continuing this program here, and I thank the staff for including that there.
Okay.
Is there any ways to improve the county's outreach with respect to affordable housing?
As a consider.
Consider.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, what was it? Was that the new title?
Consider methods for improving the county's outreach with respect to affordable housing, the need for affordable housing. And I don't like referring to the community's opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Just consider these bullet items.
Okay, is that
Yeah.
And
clear?
was there any changes to the bulleted items, or are we leaving those the same?
Well, if it's consider, you could add consider requiring a community meeting for all new multifamily proposals.
Or rather than all, just say, or new multifamily proposals?
No.
We could leave it open.
Okay.
Based on the scale.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, on the bullet points, I would just expand the using visual simulations, because I think that could include, and should include, representations of successful comparable projects.
Do you want that whole sentence in there?
I would like to see, in addition to the visual simulations, which talks about a project-specific proposal, comparable projects, imagery from comparable projects. Because I think those tell a great story if you've got successful projects from other locations that are closely aligned with and comparable to the projects being considered.
Okay, does this look like the right language that we went around a few times?
Yep, that works.
And the title is correct? Do you want us to read it, Erica? So you can
Yes.
Commissioner.
Okay, so on that wording, all who support it?
Yep.
Aye.
Yes.
So that's unanimous. Now we move on to the Housing Equity Commission.
No,
No,
it's
it's
tenant
tenant
protection. I think that we leave this in here. It's explore providing rental protections. I think it's very important to do that.
How could we just say, explore providing rental protections such as, and then the list.
Sure. I would like to include in the bullet points, something, similar to what San Francisco did, anti-eviction ordinance. Well, we can put down the anti-eviction.
Well, just cause eviction is the same thing.
Just cause eviction.
It's not the same thing, like what they did there, and then that's the thing, it's like, I don't really know exactly how to name it, but what they did there was like, for example, let's say that someone wants to rebuild my complex where I live, and they cannot sell it in 1 year to other developer if they don't pay like higher amounts of taxes or something like for complex, like multi-family complex. So it's, I was researching here is anti-eviction policies, but
I think that my understanding is that just cause eviction covers
That
those
too.
types. So you evict somebody for a reason, they are violating their lease, they're not paying their rent, those type of things. But you wouldn't evict somebody for an arbitrary reason that wasn't covered under their lease provision.
yeah, let's leave it like that. And then if I find more information that's different from what we are saying now, I'll bring it up.
Okay.
That's for next time.
Okay, so that's okay with everyone? Okay. Then we move on to housing.
We deleted the reference to
Right.
the ordinance.
Okay.
Establish a housing
Providing
equity
rental
commission.
protections, such as.
I think we have it here.
Yeah. I'm going to speak out against the next proposal.
Yeah.
Though I consider myself a very strong advocate for housing equity, I just think that an awful lot of this already happens. Another commission is probably something we don't need.
I agree.
I agree. Commissioner Erickson?
I disagree only because the housing authority, the current housing commission we have in the county is related to the housing authority and therefore like public housing and other properties, and Section 8 voucher is not related specifically for the development of affordable housing and et cetera. I tend to disagree, and also the language here is consider. So it's not that it's going to really create, it's consider, and if it was created, where the suggestion came from, Libby? Sorry,
This suggestion came from our meeting in June with housing providers who said that one of the main constraints to developing housing was around the issue that housing has become such an issue of concern in a lot of communities, and there was suggestions to add a housing commission that could advise the Board of Supervisors, similar to the what's the commission that use not the Housing Authority, the Commission on Aging, or that addresses here are some issues in the community around it, and so as an advisory board to the Board of Supervisors.
But some of those commissions, like the Commission on Aging, are mandated by the state.
Right.
And I think the board has been trying to reduce the number of commissions, not increase them. They were striking it.
Yeah, we have staff that does this, and we have a housing element process that does this.
Okay, are we ready to straw vote? I'd say all in favor of removing it?
Aye.
And opposed? Okay, so that was a 4-to-1 vote. Okay, conduct site assessment on housing element sites.
Like I said, the need for this. If somebody comes along to develop a site, they're going to have to go through the process. Once the county have done it in advance.
I can just imagine what it would cost on Silvera St. Vincent's.
Plus, we've already done a mini version of this in the SEIR, right? There was a biological assessment.
There was an initial assessment on the sites and housing element, yes.
And you recommend that we delete this item?
I agree.
I would agree with that, great.
Okay?
Okay, so that is 5-0 to remove it. We're actually making it shorter.
Let's make this meeting shorter.
Evaluate housing overlay designation.
I think this is something that needs to be done.
Yes, I'm in favor of this.
I agree. Okay, so it sounds like we all agree with that. So 5-0. Okay, then we get to the clarify the applicability program, clarify the applicability of state density bonus. I think this is actually essential. Yes.
Yes.
It's okay. Does anyone disagree? No. Okay, so I think we're unanimous in keeping that one in. And is there anything else?
I actually have one more item. I don't want to take a lot of time because I'm still an hour away from home. But you know, I would like to see another program in here that starts to take a look at the unique housing problems that we face in the rural areas of the county. And you know, it's been 40 years now since the development potential in West Marin was shifted to East Marin, the 101 corridor, and I think it's time to look at the unexpected consequences of that in West Marin and the things that need to be done. We have a rush hour now on Point Reyes Petaluma Road, westbound in the morning and eastbound in the evening, as the people who live in Petaluma and Rona Park come into West Marin. And especially in the coastal zone, where the coastal zone policies have made living in the coastal zone so attractive, it has driven up property values to the point where in a number of communities, over half the houses are now not occupied at all. And the people who buy these houses don't want to rent out second units or have a caretaker. They prefer to have motion detector and security services for their security. And it's just driving down the availability of housing in West Marin. And I think it's time to have a program that looks at the unique problems of housing in the rural areas, separately from the big problems on the 101 corridor. We've got in the Shoreline School District right now, here's a district that goes from north of Bodega Bay to halfway between Olima and Bolinas, has schools in Bodega Bay, Tamales, Point Reyes Station, and Inverness, and there's so few kids left that the school district is having to look at closing one of those schools. When you consider, this geographical distribution of schools, closing any one of them is going to be a huge economic hardship. So there are real problems, the fact that we cannot provide housing for our population that's working out there. And I would like to see a program that starts to look at the issues, the unique issues of housing problems in the rural areas.
And are you asking for a study? Is there some specific solutions you're suggesting? Do you have any more?
No, I think it's time we just need to start studying it. Yes, looking at it.
Okay.
Because we've never looked at the housing problems
Specifically
to rural areas.
Right.
We've always assumed that rural areas take care of themselves, and it used to be the case, but it isn't anymore.
We did consider a couple of programs last time that were one that was around limiting renting for bed and breakfast use. There was another one.
Yeah.
That was part of the coastal program.
It was also in the housing element originally, but the enforcement and the staffing piece of it was removed because of constraints on that. So we'll look at those and look at the programs that are in the LCP, because I think that,
Yeah, well, the LCP was approved with the program to evaluate, a rental ordinance or vacation
So if
rental
you could come
ordinance.
back with some sort of broad policy
okay.
thing that recognizes that there's a uniqueness today in rural areas, and we need to start identifying the parameters of that uniqueness and possibilities for solutions.
Okay.
Now that you propose something, I'm going to very quickly propose, or ask actually staff, because I know that there is a program related to fair housing here, and I'm not sure if it's related, but there is a big crisis here in terms of the people, households with Section 8 not being able to find housing here that would accept that voucher. And is there a program related to address this issue on the housing element already?
Not specifically, no.
Can we use the same approach, like can you explore something for this issue and then explore something for addressing this issue of Section 8 voucher acceptance? Explore, I don't know what the solution is, but.
Sure, we'll bring something back to
Yeah.
look at, to see if there's some other best practices. I
Yeah,
have
maybe
there's
there's
all
out there.
of
Okay.
Okay, is there anything else?
Yes, I would just like to commend staff, Alyssa and Lily. Staff report was well written. You have incredible endurance for being here at this late hour. And I just think that you did good work, and I know that you will continue to in producing the draft elements.
Commissioner Holland?
Just a general comment, I wanted to thank Commissioner Erickson for putting forward the idea of the evening meeting. And we were a little bit skeptical whether it would work, because we tried it before and it didn't, and it worked very well from that. And I think, maybe we didn't plan to be here this late, but I was pleased with the turnout, and I thought I'm glad we did it.
Well, let me ask staff, is it appropriate to continue this hearing to the planning commission meeting of August 25th?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a motion to that effect?
I'll move we continue the hearing on the Marin County Housing Element Update to
August 25th.
August 25th.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. So, if there's no further business of the commission, we'll stand adjourned.
Thank you.
2:57.
Wow, thank you. What stamina you have. I never thought we'd get that far. Thank you, I appreciate it.
We always come through with a question.
You were asking about the Marin site and the cemetery. Basically, it's mixed use, retail only. You don't want to go back to this again. Martin Levine's building. It's destroying the environment. It's 30 minutes.
Well, before the board needs to act on knowing the answer.
No, my comment, again, it was just. Color on the we heard Marin was passing on that.
And that felt good too.
Yeah, I know why all these people. Discriminating on tickets. Vintage city.
Come up with the best.
Yeah. When it started. Which one? Oh, at the beginning. Yeah, at the beginning. Oh, yeah. Each, it's the same group of people. Each one of them represents a group. See? So, actually, they're organized. Well, that was the point of order that I made. Tell us what an organization is. Because I got up here. Yeah. I know, I heard you say that. But it's an important point. But what the organization did first.